Hello again everyone. In this video I want to talk about another of the antennas I use for my SOTA activations. In the last series of videos we looked at making the Fuchskreis tuner, which is very good for CW only rigs, these little small pocket rigs. I also have a KX2 which I love to use. It's a really rich set of features, great receive, and it also has a built-in tuner. So when I'm using that, I want to be able to use any band at all that it's capable of transmitting on, and I want to be able to just click to tune in order to use that band. And to do that I use an End Connected Windom. It's a rather unusual type of antenna, not so many people know about it, so I want to show you how I build it. And it was designed originally by M0RZF, I believe, and the idea was given to me by G3UNA, who I happened to just bump into on the street while I was back in England. And we got talking about end-fed antennas, and he put me onto this design. I haven't looked back since, so I'm very grateful to him for that. It's called a Windom because it is in principle a Windom, and I want us to look at what a Windom is firstly. I don't want to spend too much time on antenna theory, but here I've got a diagram of a Windom, and you can see a normal dipole we would feed in the center here, have about a 75 ohm impedance. If we move the feed point away, we get a slightly higher impedance to 200 ohms. But it stays at about 200 ohms across a much bigger range of bands, whereas if it was fed in the center, you'd only be able to work two bands, the half wave and then the full wave. So yeah, this is a very useful antenna, and I think a lot of people agree that the benefits of a Windom generally outweigh any disadvantages it has. It's far more versatile, and its versatility, whilst it may not have the best radiation pattern of any antenna, its versatility makes it really the antenna of choice for most hams. So there's a normal Windom, and you can see we've got our 4:1 current balun at the feed point, bringing the 200 ohm impedance down to 50 ohms. An end connected Windom will connect here, and I've got a diagram there. So here's our end connected Windom. How have we done this? Because you would say if it's end connected, it's just going to be, if you connect at the end, it's going to be a half wave. But what we do is we very cleverly use a short piece of coax here. And that means that RF current will flow back along the jacket, along the outer braid of the coax until it reaches our current balun. And our current balun is now at the end of the antenna. And we'll talk about the kind of ferrites you can use here a bit later on. And here, so where the inner conductor of the coaxial comes out, here we connect just a normal bit of wire, and that becomes the long leg, and then the coax becomes the short leg. The beauty of this is now we have done away with the coax cable that would normally come down here, and we can connect with just a relatively short piece of coax to our rig, so it saves a huge amount of weight, and of course it's also very convenient when you can connect at the end like a normal end fed antenna. So that's basically it. This one is cut for 40 to 6 meters, so it's what here we've got about 18 meters of wire before trimming and 3.65 meters of coax. We'll talk about, you can use different kinds of coax depending on what you want your antenna for. Of course, we're going to focus on SOTA, so we're going to focus on the materials that you need for building a very lightweight SOTA antenna. And that's basically it. I've got some examples that I've made that we can look at. The first one I made, when I started out making them, were quite big. And so here's the first one. You can see here's the long leg of the wire. It's in a bit of a mess, but there's the coax. So this is the coax leg as it moves out until it reaches the feed point, which is here, where it suddenly transfers to the wire. And I've got a bit of adhesive lined heat shrink tubing here just to hold it. So that's what it kind of looks like, and you can see I've got two ferrites here. This is an FT14043, and this is an FT8261. What material you use does matter, and I used 61 on this. It was just an experiment, but I soon learned that you're better off with sticking with 43. 61's for higher bands, and 43 is generally best if you're going to be on 7 and 20 megahertz. It did work, but it's not as good. So type 43 generally. If you're on a 160 meter, an antenna for 160 meters, then you're going to need a type 31, and that's going to be very big because they only come in this big size. So, but for our purposes, 43 will usually be your first choice of ferrite material. So that's one. That first one, I found that you could actually reduce the size and it would still work. And this is the antenna that I use every day, my everyday SOTA antenna with the KX2. I'll unwind some of the line here so you can get a better look. Now you can see I've managed to reduce the size of the ferrites. They're both type 43, and that would normally go in a tree somewhere and hold it, and then the rest of the antenna is all on this really handy washing line reel, a camping washing line reel from Gellert. And so ferrite here, I believe it's an FT114 43, and that I believe is an FT82 43, and I find that's okay. With this, because of course you need to stop, because you've got current flowing back down the coax, you're trying to make use of this effect, you have to stop it somewhere where you want the end of the dipole to be, otherwise it would flow right back down to the radio. So having enough impedance here is very important. Using two small ferrites like this, of course it works, but you do get a little bit of RF on the feed line. That will vary. Like I say, it depends what rig you're using. With the KX2, it's no problem. I sometimes get a little bit of a hum in my noise cancelling headphones, but it works absolutely fine and it's never been a problem. So you're going to have to experiment with what size ferrite works for you. Two different size ferrites, so I've heard, can minimize capacitive coupling across your cores, and having more cores obviously increases your impedance. So you want maximum impedance to get the antenna working, but also for SOTA you want minimum weight, so it's a balance of those factors. Again, this antenna was cut for 40 meters, works fine on 40. It also tunes up on 60, and one thing I've found after using these antennas is that a 3/8 wave will actually radiate very, very well. So although this is electrically a bit short for 60 by about 10 meters, it actually works really, really well. The beauty of that is that if you want an antenna for 80 meters, you only need to make an antenna for 60 meters, and it will still radiate pretty well. Because I'm wanting it to radiate now on 60 meters, radiate on 80 meters as the lowest band, obviously I need a bit more impedance. I don't think that would be very good for 80 meters. It's not going to be enough, so we're going to use more impedance, and for that I've got these two ferrites here. Now I've got back to an FT140 43 and an FT114, and they're going to sit like this. That should hopefully give me enough impedance on 80 meters. But generally, I won't be using it very much on 80. More often I'll be using it on 60 and above. So those are the ferrites, and the first, we'll look at the materials first before we look at design. So what you're going to need is some coax. Now for SOTA, I use RG178, which is a very thin type of coax, and I've got 10 meters of it here. One thing to be aware of is that if you're making it for a permanent installation, you can use this at home. You can make one of these at home, and it will be it will work, and it's a great antenna to have at home. But the problem with this coax is the sheath. The PTFE sheath is very, very delicate, and if it's out in the sun day after day, it will soon split, and then you'll get water going into the coax and it will start to corrode. So for a permanent installation, I would have a look at different types of RG174. There are some with coatings that are specifically UV resistant, specifically developed for outdoor installation, and they're much better. So you might be tempted to go for a very high quality PTFE coax. I would advise against that if it's going to be a permanent installation, and go for a good UV resistant RG174. The difference in impedance I don't think is going to affect the antenna. So that's the first thing. You'll need enough coax. And then you'll need a connector. I've got a nice Telegentner BNC there that's going to go on the end. You'll also need, you might have seen it on the ferrites, you'll need some clear transparent heat shrink treatment. Well, it doesn't have to be transparent, but you'll need a long piece of it. And I've got some 2.4 to 1.2 millimeter transparent coax there. This is because, as I say, this coax is so delicate. It really needs protecting, especially around the ferrites. You can see what I've done. I've put the heat shrink tubing over the coax to make it thicker, and then I've wrapped it around the ferrites, and it just stops the jacket from getting damaged. And in this antenna that I make, you're going to see, I'm going to extend it further towards along the jacket, just because I've found, because where it goes into the reel, it also takes a bit of abuse here, and it needs protecting there. So that's that. Then your clear heat shrink tubing, your ferrites, as I said, and then you're also going to need some wire for your antenna. I just use this basic switching wire. What is it? It's I don't know, I think it's about 1.1 millimeters. 1.1 millimeter, nothing special about it at all. I just picked it up, €7.80 for a 100-meter reel. And like I say, this antenna is still going strong. So, and it needs to be quite thin, because of course you also want it to get it on this reel. So as thin as it will need to be to get on one of these washing line reels. And then some adhesive lined heat shrink tubing for the feed points. You'll find the inner conductor on RG178 is extremely thin and fragile. And I've had it actually snap on me on one occasion. If you're stretching the antenna between 2 points, you don't have any support in the middle, you're going to easily break the feed point there as it comes off. So you've got to have some adhesive lined heat shrink to take the strain off the inner conductor. It's just not thick enough really for rugged use. That is about everything you'll need. Just one note before I move on. You'll notice we've got the feed point here, and you'll say, well, hang on. In a normal Windom, we've got a 4-to-1 current balun here, and that obviously reduces the impedance down to about 50 ohms. So in some cases you don't need a tuner. In this antenna, the End Connected Windom, you'll notice there's suddenly no voltage balun at the feed point. That means that our feed point impedance will stay at 200 ohms. Now the thing is here, it's not a problem for the KX2. The KX2 can easily transform 200 ohms, even more, maybe even 1,000. So there's no reason to carry another balun when the internal ATU can take care of that transformation. The only thing we need is a current balun here to stop the RF flowing back to the rig. So I don't do it. If you want, you can create a current balun. If it's for your home use and you want to get the impedance down even further, a small piece of ferrite bar with some coax wrapped around it will make a perfectly acceptable current balun. Again, that's something you'll have to look into. There are details for that online, how to make one. So that's basically the theory behind it. The first thing you're going to need to do when you start to make it, what I like to do is I like to get some graph paper, and I put the ferrites on the graph paper like this. I can't really hold it up too well. So if you can see, then I draw around them with a pencil, and I mark where I'm going to need to drill in the acrylic to actually put tie wraps through it and hold them. Then I take the ferrites away, and I do the outline of the T-piece, an acrylic T-piece. I got this idea from DX Wire. They actually sell an acrylic T-piece, so you can buy one if you want, but it's very thick and heavy, and I took to using just some 2mm acrylic. I found it was also fine, although it needs careful handling. Once I've made my outline and I know how big I want this T-piece to be, I then lay a piece of acrylic over it. I go round it with a permanent marker, and I mark out where I'm going to need to saw with my coping saw, and where I'm going to need to drill with my drill. Stick with very fine drill bits, maybe 3mm, and then try and drill very, very slowly from both sides, so it splits so easily. What I'm going to do is, when I start drilling this, I'm going to drill it before I cut it out, so there's the least chance of actually splitting the acrylic. but that's one of the tricky ones. As a drill with a very slow RPM, even a hand drill can be very useful for drilling these. A high-speed drill and it will just rip your acrylic apart in no time. So drilling acrylic is a bit of a dark art in itself. Anyway, that's the first part of this. We're gonna part two, you'll see when I've got all this cut out, and we're going to look at putting the heat shrink tubing over the RG178, shrinking it, and then putting the whole thing together. It's very simple. So, see you in part two.